Today we're going to continue our conversations about addiction and recovery, specifically looking at why not just say no. As I shared in an earlier video, it's important that we share with others what we're learning as active mentors. And in that spirit, I'd like to share something that I've just learned. And I'm going to share it also in the spirit of active mentoring. I'm going to share it as I know it by heart. Sharing by heart requires for us to be spontaneous. It requires for us to reflect. And it occurs to me that that's the opposite attitude of most traditional classroom settings, is to share what we know by heart. I'm thinking back in an experience I had in graduate school where a professor would come in and read through his detailed notes week after week, 3 hours at a time, and why it was that I developed migraine headaches in response to that. So sharing by heart is just the opposite. It's just sharing what comes up in real time, and has a different kind of modality of expression. So here goes then. In psychology, neurobiologists have been studying for the last 10 years one of the hallmarks of addiction, namely the loss of control. The loss of control in using drugs despite significant adverse consequences. There's been a lot of study to try to figure out, why do people continue to drink and use drugs even when they court imminent disaster? The loss of family, the loss of job, the loss of integrity. What's going on at a biological level? And recent research has isolated a part of the brain that seems to be very affected by chronic alcohol and drug abuse that might pertain to this. It's a mouthful. It's the corticobasal ganglia network. This is what I'll share by heart. Okay, the cortico refers to the cortex. The basal ganglia are part of our brain that are involved in motor movement, as well as in new learning, as well as unlearning. And so the corticobasal ganglia network would be the connection between the cortex, which is the site of our executive functioning and what we think of as our thinking, and our capacity to learn or alter that thinking. And that's the site for that is in the basal ganglia. This network, that is the neural net that leads from the cortex to the basal ganglia and back again, seems particularly vulnerable to drug and alcohol abuse. In fact, all drugs, including alcohol, affect our capacity for change in the basal ganglia. Another way to talk about change is they affect our ability to learn. They alter normal learning processes that are critical for making changes in our behavior. I believe that emphasizing the neurobiological research could make a difference for counselors in the field of addiction and recovery, especially the addict who will just simply not learn to stop with compulsive behavior such as using and drinking. This research suggests that these brain centers are physically damaged as a function of ingesting drugs and alcohol, thus less capable of unlearning. I think I can be misunderstood on this, and that would be going easy on the addict. I think that's really quite the opposite. I think it's kind of a cop-out to say, well, why can't you just learn how to stop, when what's going on is that the brain is really being dealt a serious blow in terms of unlearning old behaviors and learning new behaviors. So my view would be is that you have to address, first of all, detoxifying the brain that can't unlearn and can't learn new behavior by getting it back to what one psychiatrist I know refers to, getting it back to the birthday brain, getting it back to the brain that as much as possible is at a baseline where this particular brain network is at least, again, hopefully amenable to change, to learning and unlearning. A topic for reflection. After reviewing this, I sat and pondered this, and I wondered to myself, what ways have I judged people, and I have judged people that are addicted, even people who are in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. Have I looked at them, I thought of this, have I looked at them as being weak, oftentimes, or even worse? Yeah, sometimes. How does this above neuropsychological finding, how might it affect attitudes like my own in terms of judgment in the past? I want to contrast it with what psychologist Carl Rogers said is the absolute bedrock of effective psychotherapy and counseling, namely unconditional positive regard. So the previous attitude that I'm talking about, that of judgment, would be quite the opposite of unconditional positive regard. And by unconditional positive regard, Rogers is not saying you give blessing to any behavior, but that you hold out for the person at their core despite their behaviors. And it's quite impossible to get to that core or that essence of a person when their brains have been bathed, sometimes for years, in alcohol and drugs. You have to, first of all, get the toxins out of the system, see my previous video on intoxication, in order to maybe give the possibility, the potential for the brain to begin to unlearn dysfunctional behaviors and to learn new, more functional ones. So I put it to all of us, the question of how we might address the needs of those that are addicted with this information in hand, and perhaps with a little bit less judgmental of an attitude. Thank you.